students, my name is Chef Brian Peffley, Pastry Art Instructor at the Lebanon County Career and Technology Center. Today we are going to demonstrate for you cake decorating, American style, and what we're going to be focusing on is task numbers 5, 10, and as part of 5, 10, we're going to show you how to decorate a cake from start to finish. We're going to show you how to tort it, fill it, crumb coat, ice, decorate it, make some roses, some inscription, and show you how to display it. Enjoy. The tools needed for American cake decorating are a turntable and a paper towel, a bowl for icing, rubber spatula, offset spatula, a serrated knife, and a bench knife. You also need pastry bags with a 104 tip, a pastry bag with a 21 or 22 star tip, a pastry bag with a 352 tip or a leaf tip of a 69. We're also going to use a 5 or a 6 straight tip. You will need a flour nail, and you will need a flour lifter. Before I start this demo, I want to make sure that I sanitize my area. I have gloves and wash my hands, and the ingredients I need are a cake, icing, a cake board, a decorative board that I'm going to display my cake on. I'm also going to need some colored icings. One for my roses, one for my writing, and then green for my leaves. The first thing I want to do is I want to cut and tort my cake. So to get started is I have a clean, damp paper towel that'll help prevent the cake from sliding around on the cake wheel for me. I also have put down saran wrap over my entire area to collect and gather any of the crumbs that may fall. I take my serrated knife and on a 90-degree perpendicular to my cake wheel, I'm going to slowly trim the top off or the crust of my cake. I'm going to just slowly turn my cake wheel and slowly slice into my cake. As I work and turn, I'm going to work closer and deeper into the cake until I come completely across and clean it off. This I can save. It can either be dried and ground up for cake crumbs, or it can be made into cake pops. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and divide this cake into 3 layers. The first one, I'm going to cut 1/3 into the cake, and I'm going to do the same technique again. I'm drawing my line around the outside perimeter of my cake, and as I connect the line, I'm going to work my way through until I get all the way through. And if I did it correctly, I'll have a nice clean slice. I'm going to do that one more time. So I'm going to divide what's left in half, draw my line all the way around, keep my hand nice and flat to prevent myself from getting cut. Never hold your hand back here, always flat on top. And then we're going to go ahead and turn and turn and turn. Connected my line, and now I'm going to slowly let the saw of the knife and also the turntable work to my advantage, and it just goes right through like butter. And if I did it correctly, you can see that my layers are all the same height. So I got 1, 2, 3 layers. Next thing I want to do is I want to clean up my area. So I'm going to take all these crumbs that I had left behind, get rid of those. One of the hallmarks of cake decorating is keeping your station nice and clean. These cake crumbs that I had left over, I'm going to gather these up. And if I was doing, let's say, 10 or 20 cakes, I could gather these all together and turn them into cake pops or into cake crumbs. So I'm going to go ahead and take my cake. I'm going to lay it over here. And this is what's nice about having the saran wrap. I can lay it right on the table. Now I have my cake board. Always remember, whenever you're decorating, the white part of the cake board is what touches the cake. The brown side is the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and start building my cake. Center my cake on the board. And now what I want to do is I want to put this off to the side, and I want to talk about icing. So here's my bowl of icing. Most students take the icing after they made it and use it right away. I highly discourage that because, as you notice, when icing sits, it becomes very lumpy or it gives the appearance of being lumpy, and when you go to spread it, it becomes very aerated. So I encourage my students to always agitate or adjust the icing according to what you're using. So that means if the icing is too thick, I would have to thin it down with either warming it up or maybe adding some milk to it. If the icing seems to be too thin for what I'm trying to do, I could add some confectionery or 10x sugar to it and tighten it up. This icing, as you can see, it is very airy. So I'm going to use just some friction of moving this around and soften the icing up. I have been agitating this for about 5 minutes. And if you want, you can put it gently on top of a warm stove or a hot plate, and that'll give you the warmth that you need that will soften up the molecules. But let me just show you. I took some of the original out, and this is what I started with, and this is what I have. So as you can see, I have a much smoother consistency to work with. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cake, move it centered, and I'm going to start filling it. So I'm going to take a dollop of my icing and my offset spatula, and again I'm going to push from the center out. And that little piece of paper towel that I have laying down on my cake wheel really gives me that glue that helps hold that board in place. Now it doesn't have to be wet, it just has to be damp enough to make it somewhat stick. Now I have over here a plain or empty mixing bowl. This icing, I want to make sure I don't scrape it back into my clean icing, so I'm going to scrape it over here. And the reason why is if there's any crumbs in here, I don't want that getting into my good icing, because this good icing here is going to be also what I'm going to use to finish the final coat on the outside of the cake. So I'm going to put my next layer on, repeat the exact same process again. I'm going to use the same amount of icing in between my layers. Start from the center and push my way out. Always remember to use your cake wheel. You don't turn, nor does the hand of your grip change. Don't change the grip of the spatula. The spatula is always held the same way. So we're going to go ahead and work our way around until we get to the beginning where we started. I'm just going to flatten that out, take my excess icing, scrape that off. And then what I like to do is my top I flip over, and I want to make sure I have a nice flat consistency. Now I'm going to look at my cake and make sure I'm centered on my board. Now what I like to do is I like to trim my cake a little bit so it sets inside the cake board. So I have my cake scrap that I had from the beginning. I'm just going to go ahead and trim using my serrated knife. I'm just going to deposit it into my scrap. Now this will turn into cake pops at a later date. So we're just going to work our way around, and all I'm doing is just trimming off that little bit of crust. Keep my nice, flat, even all the way around. Keep that nice up and down slicing, working my way around, trimming it off. I want about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch inside the edge of that board. All right, from here, now that I'm finished, I'm going to move my cake off to the side. I'm going to wipe off and clean off my board. I always want to make sure I keep myself as clean as possible. I'm going to return my cake. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this scrap icing that I had, and I'm going to start crumb coating my cake. And all I'm going to do is slowly just take my spatula. I'm going to work our way all the way around the outside of the cake. We're going to continue icing, working that icing back and forth. I always look at cake decorating as 4 steps. You ice the side, you ice the top, then you straighten the side, and then you straighten the top. So this first icing that I'm doing is just the crumb coat. So all I'm doing is putting a thin mask of icing on this cake and then stick it in the refrigerator so it sets up. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to decorate and ice this top off. Same technique again, work my way around, work work my way around until I have all the icing spread evenly. Make sure my cake's centered. I'm gonna flatten out my top. I'm gonna take my scrap icing here, scrape that off. Now I'm gonna clean up my side. And I'm just gonna drag and use my cake wheel so I have a nice crumb coat. The crumb coat nowadays is being called naked cakes, and that's one of the trends right now. Personally, I'm not a big fan of it because it doesn't show much skill, but to each his own. So we're gonna go ahead and clean off this top, make it nice and clean. And then from here, I'm gonna take this cake, put it in the refrigerator for about, let's say, 15 minutes till this buttercream becomes firm, and then I'll be able to ice it, finish it. So I'm going to go ahead and start icing the side. So I put the icing on my palette knife. I'm going to slowly use the edge. Since I cut my cake 1/8 of an inch in, I'm using my cake board as my straight edge. So I'm just going to work my way around and ice each side, all the way around the side of the cake, I should say, and just continue to keep working. I use the side of my spatula to just keep that edge nice and clean. Once we've iced the sides, now we're going to go ahead and ice the top. Put some icing in the center, take my palette knife or my spatula, spread my icing out to the outside rim from the center out using my cake wheel, and just continue working around the cake. Scrape off my excess, and now I'm going to use my spatula and flatten out the top. So like I said, I iced the sides, and now I've iced the top. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and straighten out the sides. Some people use a bench knife. I'm going to try to use my spatula. So I'm going to come in, and I'm going to just slowly drag this. Now I'm turning around here so you guys can see it on the camera. I'm just going to straighten out that side. So ice the sides, ice the top, and I'm going to straighten out the sides. Alright? And then I'm going to go ahead and straighten out my top. So I want to clean my spatula off, and I'm going to pull the excess from the top off. Take from the outside edge and come straight across and get that clean, crisp edge. Pull and scrape. I'm going to pull, and I'm going to scrape. I'm going to pull, scrape, and pull, and scrape. So as you can see, I have a nice iced cake. From this stage, we're going to go ahead and then start decorating it. So a lot of students have difficulty moving the cake from the turntable onto a plate or a decorative cake board. So instead of trying to grab it and your fingers end up slipping into the cake, what I do is I take my spatula, come underneath the cake, twist my wrist and elevate the cake, get my hand underneath of it, and get my entire hand underneath the cake, use my spatula, come in underneath my hand, and then I put the weight on the spatula and then slowly lower it onto the palette, onto the plate. That way I don't end up getting any fingers in my cake. Now that my cake is already iced, I'm now going to go on to decorating the borders. So to do that, I have a disposable pastry bag, I have my coupler and a ring, and I have a 21 or 22 inch, this one's a 22 star tip that's in the end. Again, proper use of a pastry bag. Make sure that you put the bag over your hand, create a little well to put your icing in. Again, agitate your icing so that you're putting smooth icing into your bag. Gonna put my icing in my bag. Trying to make sure that I keep the icing from being on the outside, because if the icing gets on the outside of the bag, it's gonna end up getting on you as well. We're gonna go ahead and move this icing forward, pushing all the air out. I'm going to twist my bag. I'm going to squeeze some of the icing back into the bowl and get rid of all the air bubbles. Now we're going to go on to piping out a shell border. Okay, to get started, I'm going to go ahead and squeeze a lot of pressure. Stop squeezing and pull away. Squeeze a lot of pressure, pull away. I'm going to keep this whole technique. I always tell my students to practice first on the back side of a sheet pan before you start on cakes. Then once you go on to dummy cakes, which are the styrofoam cakes, and then progress to a real cake. That way you're only giving the customer your very best after you practiced. So we're going to continue this same border all the way around and finish out this. And we're going to continue going shell border all the way around until we get to where we started. To decorate the top, we're going to do a reverse shell. We're going to start squeezing in one direction, coming around clockwise, and come around, go counterclockwise. Clockwise, counterclockwise. And we're going to work this all the way around. Continue the shell all the way around. Don't worry about speed, worry about consistency. Make each shell matter. Each shell that you pipe out should look exactly like the other one. I'm going to go ahead and put a rosette here, and then one over here, and one over here. That's going to be used to elevate my roses so that it doesn't sit so flat on my cake. Everybody has a different technique of how to do a buttercream rose. I'm going to show you mine, but there's no wrong way as long as it ends up looking pretty. So I'm going to do a base on my nail, and then I'm going to hold my bag, making sure the flange is at the bottom. I'm going to slowly turn and create my center. I'm going to lift up and over, up and over, and up and over. So I end up with something that looks like that. Okay, so I'm going to now take my rose and I'm going to cradle it in my scissors, put it on one of my rosettes, squeeze, and I'm going to use the tip of my nail to slide it out. Again, cradle, squeeze, and slide. Now I'm going to show you how to do a rosebud, and it's 3 easy steps. You have the icing going in outside, and then circulate back, and then up over top. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. Come in this way, over, opposite direction, and then up over top. I'm going to put one more down here at the bottom, over, up, and around. The only thing I have to add yet is leaves. Instead of using a pastry bag with a coupler and a ring, I'm going to show you a really simple and easy trick that you can use to do leaves. So take a piece of parchment paper, and if you're familiar with rolling a paper cone or a cornet, grab it from the top, roll it into a cone, form your cone, and remember the word cornet gets its name from trumpet or cornet. And then we're going to take our green icing, which I already have made. I'm going to agitate that. I'm going to put a dollop of that inside my cornet. Take this icing in the cornet. Now I'm going to take it where the seam is. I'm going to fold it in half. Then I'm going to fold away from the seam, because if I fold towards the seam, it unravels. But if I fold away from it, it's going to make that seam nice and tight. So I'm going to roll away from that seam until I have this all into a tight, writable instrument. Now I want to show you really close up. We're going to take this and I'm going to cut, let me move my cake out of the way here. I'm going to cut a V. I'm going to cut on one side and I'm going to cut on the other side. And I'm going to recreate the 352 tip. Let me just come in here and cut a V on either side. So what I did was I took the tip and I cut like that. So you end up with looking at like this, so it has a cut. And then I'll be able to squeeze out my icing. Okay, now I'm going to take my cornet that I have cut and prepared, and I'm going to squeeze, and it's going to give me the same technique as what the 352 would. So I'm just going to go around here and fill in with some leaves. I don't want to put too many in the inside because that's where my writing's going to go, but I can come in underneath here and put 1 or 2. So we end up looking like this. The final thing we're going to do is do some inscription and writing. As I learned, many students aren't familiar with cursive writing, so we start that out as a basic skill. So the first thing I'm going to do is start with, and we're going to write happy birthday. I come around, up and down. When you go and use your icing, try to drag your tip. All right, we're going to go ahead, and there's my H. I'm going to do A, and then the P, connecting them all together, and another P, and the Y to finish it out. And there's our happy. I always like to do a little back flooding to fill out my letters. Then we're going to go ahead and do happy. All right, next one I'm going to do is birthday. Now sometimes people like to do their roses after they do their inscription because that gives them room. I'm going to go ahead and do my birthday and show you we can squeeze it in just if we go right tight to the end here. All right, so there's my B, and then I'm going to go across with birthday. I, and then the R, and then the T and the H. Don't forget the R, and the D, and the A, and the Y. I'm going to come down, I'm going to drag it around to the front. I'm going to cross my T and dot my I. Happy birthday. Through this demonstration in cake decorating, the American style way, I showed you how to crumb coat a cake, torte a cake, fill a cake, ice a cake. We showed you how to do a shell border, showed you how to do a reverse shell border on top. We showed you how to do roses, rosebuds, and write with buttercream.
Ménilmontant, mais oui, madame.